Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Sam's Healing Podcast. I'm Sam. I'm thrilled that you're here today. I'm more thrilled that an old friend and a recent guest has come back in. His name is Max. He is a great friend of mine and also a betrayed male spouse. Max, how are you this morning?
I'm great, Sam. Thank you for having me back. I'm looking forward to furthering this discussion with you today.
You know, I've had a lot of guys reach out to me since our last podcast and say, dude, I've been wanting to hear from a guy like Max for a while. And so how was it coming in, and sharing just your pain, your experience? I had you get on YouTube and answer some comments and just, interface with some people. What was the experience like? This is something that's takes a little while to get used to, sharing your biggest failure and embarrassment,
You put it so well, as you often do, Sam. That's exactly right. That's the situation that I am embracing by doing this. And to be raw with people watching, as I said to you after we got off last time, it was a very healing conversation for me. As you also mentioned last time, Sam, I'm someone who's still going through some of this. It's not like I certainly am not someone who has figured it all out, hardly. How many of us even get to a point at which we feel like we've done that? Maybe we've closed our minds at the point at which we tell ourselves that we figured it all out. This is work that we do daily, long term. There may never be an expiration date on the work that needs to be done. But yeah, it was a very healing conversation for me. What I really love about the opportunity that this platform and this podcast presents, lastly, Sam, is to not waste my pain, to not waste the grief that this brought into my life, and instead transform it into something that can be useful for others. And I really appreciate the opportunity that this provides me to do just that.
And I think that's something that I say to people all the time. If they come from faith, I'll say, look, God never wastes our sorrows. If we don't come from faith, atheist, agnostic, what have you, there is a opportunity for us to not waste what we've been through. The choice is ours. And there is kind of this comedic moment when I'll meet with someone for the first time and they've watched my videos for several years, maybe even a decade, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm meeting with a rock star. And I'm like, yeah, a rock star for completely blowing his life apart, traumatizing other people, and humiliating himself. And then I also get people, I want to hear from a betrayed male. And I'm like, hey, easy with the demands list. It's a little hard to find people that are willing to go on camera for all the world to see and hear about their pain and hurt. So for that, I am so grateful that you are in to talk more about your experience. So let's jump right into it. Last time we had a thrilling discussion, but we ended with kind of like a little bit of a teaser on the shame that a betrayed male feels. The shame is a different nuance. And I had many betrayed females that watched the podcast and listened to it and absolutely loved your heart and your ability to communicate. So we're talking about shame, not just for the betrayed male, little added kind of emphasis for the betrayed male because that's who you are, but it's true for the female as well. And we're not trying to leave them out at any level, but talk a little bit about how the betrayed male can look at the shame as a filter that covers everything of which you interpret the unfaithful's actions.
Well, for the betrayed male, there's the element of masculinity that we attach to our identities in our marriages, in every aspect of that marriage, being a lover, being a husband, being a friend, being a partner, if you have children, being a father. That infidelity attacks like the most insidious virus. And for the betrayed male in particular, we talked last time about the word emasculate, having no readily available female equivalent that I'm aware of. Which to me is very interesting. I think that speaks loudly to the distinctiveness of the betrayed male's experience. But in broader strokes, Sam, I want to say this. As we tiptoe into this discussion of shame in the aftermath of discovery from the standpoint of the betrayed spouse, betrayal has beaten you down enough you've been involuntarily thrown into this club of betrayed spouses, male or female. So the last thing you want to do is beat yourself up even more by becoming your own harshest critic in that moment. What you really want to do is to become your own best friend in that moment. And this is so important because the shaming thoughts that your mind is generating are being generated by a mind that is in chaos. Your mind is a very haunted, chaotic place in the aftermath of the discovery of your spouse's betrayal. So consider the source from which the thoughts of that chaotic mind are coming from. Question those thoughts. Really think hard about the things your mind's trying to tell you in the aftermath of that, because again, it's a haunted, dark, chaotic place, the betrayed spouse's mind, male or female. And to get more specific and concrete on this real quick, Sam, as I've thought through my own experience as a betrayed male and the way that shame played such a prominent role in the extent to which I beat myself up after discovery, is that it takes advantage of a very common reality that becomes, unfortunately, a common source of tremendous pain in the aftermath of infidelity. What I mean specifically is everyone who's been married for 5 minutes understands that we all make mistakes in our marriages, right? Okay. And what infidelity does is it invites you to turn every mistake or shortcoming, perceived or actual, into an opportunity to just beat the hell out of yourself and blame yourself and shame yourself into believing that you are responsible for your spouse's decision to do what he or she did. That's one of the most dangerous aspects of infidelity. As I mentioned to you, as I was putting some notes together, each mistake we believe we've made in our marriage becomes this unexploded landmine waiting for us to stomp on it in the fraught terrain of betrayal. That terrain is a very dangerous place to explore in the aftermath of D-Day. There are landmines everywhere, each of which is just another reason that you've told yourself that your spouse did this. I wasn't a good enough lover. I wasn't a good enough friend. I wasn't a good enough partner. The men or women, who, whatever your situation is, that my spouse was cheating on me with, had more money, better looks. In the case of the betrayed male's situation, they were more masculine or better fathers to their kids. Whatever stuff we tell ourselves is almost certainly at least worthy of questioning, because again, it is being generated by a mind that is not functioning on all cylinders. Okay, it can't in the aftermath of the discovery of something that fractures your world in 1,000 pieces.
No, you're exactly right. It is so traumatizing. It completely causes, as you had said last time, for the male to feel emasculated. And when you're feeling embarrassed, humiliated, and emasculated, you're not necessarily using all of your reasoning faculties to be able to interpret the choices of your partner with objectivity. Am I right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll raise another example that I mentioned in some notes that we shared as we prepare for this conversation. My best friend is a guy who lives in Harlem now. We grew up in Brooklyn. He's, as I mentioned to you, he's this gruff guy with a thick Brooklyn accent. We used to bowl for money in locked bowling alleys in bad neighborhoods against unsavory characters on weekends as teenagers. So you can imagine the kind of street smarts that he brings to a discussion like me telling him, I'm the reason my spouse cheated on me. I'm to blame. And he said to me, Max, if a stranger walked up to you out of the blue and punched you in the face in the street, would your first reaction to that to be to apologize to that person? And I think there's not a lot of daylight between that scenario and the one that infidelity presents. You have been punched in the face out of the blue, out in the open, by the person you trusted most, by the person you have worked so hard to love, flaws and all. Sometimes you failed that person. Sometimes you failed yourself before that person in your marriage. We get that. But to decide reflexively almost that you're the reason this happened is to delude yourself in so many ways. Just real quick, Sam, some of the ways in which the mind is deluding you by leading you to believe that you are to blame for your spouse's decision to cheat. Think about how controlling a mindset that is. It's as if you tell yourself that you were in control of your spouse's every whim and preference and tendency and desire and perception and response and reaction. But guess what? Your spouse is their own individual with their own free will that was going to be activated with or without your presence in their life. And more to the point, your spouse is someone who dragged their own weighty emotional and psychological luggage into your marriage. They loaded that suitcase long before they even knew your name. Okay, so right. How reasonable is it to blame yourself for the things they stuffed into that luggage when the likely origins of the behavior they manifested in your marriage trace much farther back to before they met you? Think also about the way I put it is, how cruel a contract you are consenting to by telling yourself that either you behave or you get cheated on. Is that truly the kind of marriage that you want? Is that truly the kind of dynamic you want to invite into your life? Turn that the other way around. Would you want to promote that dynamic in your marriage whereby your spouse is given to understand that they behave or you stray the farm? Is that really what you want? And lastly, Sam, real quick, I want to get to a more specific example of what we mean when we say that your spouse's decision to cheat probably originates from things that happened long ago, unresolved traumas and triggers that you had nothing to do with. Because, Sam, I would hear when I was in my most desperate moments in the aftermath of discovery, people, experts in the field say that, and I would think, well, that sounds very theoretical to me. They're just trying to make me feel better. But I think I have a very specific, concrete example to help you understand that that is real. It is not theoretical. What I mean is this. There was one night I took my spouse out onto the front porch after the kids went to bed. We cracked open a beer. We start talking. I had prepared as much as I could for this conversation to make it a safe place for us to engage with each other honestly, openly, candidly, and frankly, fearlessly. And what my spouse ended up telling me is, she had a sister who was born with a brain tumor. Her sister's childhood was replete with chemotherapy and surgery that robbed her of the ability to see. Okay. So that person's needs, this is a family with 4 children in it, were immense and overwhelmed the needs of the other 3 children in that household. What happened? My wife felt unseen and unheard in that environment. She explicitly told me that she felt like she didn't even deserve to voice her own needs in that environment because her needs never could approach the urgency of this one sister's. So she takes that into her adulthood, and unfortunately for her, it is my perception after a lot of therapy and years of reflecting on this, that her addiction to external validation arose from that set of circumstances. What does that have to do with me? Nothing. That happened when she was like 6 years old. Okay. Right. And Sam, as well as anyone in the space that almost invariably infidelity can be traced back to some kind of unresolved trauma from much farther back in our past than the moment at which we met our significant other.
It's one of those variables that I say it all the time. I've never had somebody be able to provide the counterpoint with any substance. No unfaithful just wakes up one day and says, today seems like a good day to devastate my family, to ruin my life, to completely jeopardize everything that I hold dear and true. Yeah. There's always a slow fade that has been happening internally within us. In your situation, I want to break from the notes that we talked a little bit about and ask you, so do you feel like you saw it coming, or do you feel like it just came out of nowhere and was like a Mike Tyson punch that just floored you when you started to go, dude, something's going on?
In the immediate moment of discovery, it felt like I had been hit by a train. It did feel like it came out of nowhere. But then when you reflect on things, you go through some therapy and you think things through over the longer haul, you can start to see how it developed into the train wreck that it became. More immediately, I was someone who prided myself, and I'm just speaking to my own personal individual set of circumstances here. This may or may not apply to yours, but in my own set of circumstances, I prided myself on not being a jealous husband. My wife wanted to go out dancing with her girlfriends one night. I was eager to let her do just that, because, frankly, just as a point of self-interest, I wanted that same freedom for myself. I totally trusted myself to not go farther with that freedom than I would want to, or my spouse would want me to. I wanted to extend the same degree of trust to her. So I kind of made a point of not adopting mindsets that I would characterize as paranoid or jealous or controlling or whatever. Maybe sometimes I was without realizing it. That is entirely possible. I certainly, contributed my share, as I said, of errors to the marriage, 100%. But in the immediate aftermath of discovery, Sam, no, I had my suspicions about a week prior to finding out, as I shared last time. But by and large, it hit me like a runaway train, man. And wow, what a wallop. I had a lot of pieces to pick up on D-Day, that's for sure.
And so now we'll talk a little bit about how the male nuance, but it's true for female, but especially for betrayed males, there's this feeling of, and you alluded to it earlier, like, I should have done this. If I could have done this, this would have prevented, right? We are fix-it people, right? We're men. I hate to make the connection of Home Depot, right? Or
Absolutely.
like Tim the Toolman Taylor. We're just so, fix it, fix it.
Yeah.
Did you go through early on this phase of, I will fix me, I will do whatever it is that I can do, I will be who I need to be, even though it kind of just doesn't feel right, but I don't care. I'm so desperate to save my little family. I will be whomever I need to be to keep her home.
Great question. And what you just said speaks to the kind of self-abandonment that in retrospect, I know I practiced in my marriage. I abandoned my own needs and desires to keep the peace, to make myself. And again, there are elements of self-interest in this that, if we're really candid with ourselves, sometimes in painful ways, were apparent, were a variable in our marriage. And in my case, I wanted to feel like I was being the good, valiant, chivalrous husband, and running away from whatever needs I was not expressing or allowing to be heard in order to make my spouse's needs come to the fore. That was a people-pleasing, self-abandoning mindset that I definitely was guilty of in my marriage. In a separate discussion, I'm also open to talking about the childhood origins of that, but that's for another conversation. What you say about ruminating about the things we believe we did wrong in our marriage and wishing we had done otherwise, wishing we had bought that wrench from Home Depot to those shortcomings we perceive in ourselves long ago, is that it's a total fallacy. There's a guy I love on YouTube. His name is Matthew Hussey, and he is an expert in the space on relationships. And one of the things he says about this is, when you've been torn to ribbons by something like infidelity or whatever traumatizing event emerges in your marriage, wishing you hadn't done what you already did is like wishing that 2 + 2 = 5. He says that you were going to do what you did because it is what you did. And you were always good because that's who you were at that moment. And now in retrospect, you've learned enough about the ways in which you engage with your spouse to grow from that, and perhaps, be a better version of yourself later on. But telling yourself, man, if I only hadn't done this, you were always going to do this, that, and the other thing at the time at which you did it, because that's who you were in that moment. There was no getting away from that. There's an inescapability to that element of the experience that the betrayed male or female has as they're ruminating, as we said, sort of in a very harshly critical way, reviewing what we perceive to be our own shortcomings and our own errors in our marriage, and going the extra, totally illogical step of saying, those are the reasons my spouse did this, because, of course, I controlled the show, right?
Right. And I think it's you're sharing so beautifully just about your experience. And I know many men just go, oh, okay, yes. So what was the moment? I had a couple of videos come out yesterday, and I had a couple of of people say some awful things, and I was like, yeah, we call that Tuesday, so we'll just move on down the road. And I had, somebody kind of get real chirpy about stuff, and I just was like, gosh, the fact that you think my whole day is going to be turned upside down because of your comments.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you something, and we didn't talk about this in the notes, but when was the moment when you realized, I've worked so hard, I've tried couples, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've done this. When was the moment that you said, I think I'm done, and the sun has set on this relationship? Obviously, you still have two small children, but with your wife, when was the moment that you said, I'm done?
Such a great question, Sam. Thank you so much for asking this, because I do think this is a question that a lot of betrayed men, perhaps in particular, would like to get an answer to, and betrayed females just as much. There are three moments that immediately occurred to me as you asked this question. First was when I asked my spouse to discontinue communication with her affair partner, and she started crying and fighting me. And the next day in couples counseling, as you just alluded to, kind of viciously blamed me and warped things that I had said in an effort to defend herself. I asked her, I gently brought it up to her after that. I said, some of the stuff that you weaponized was just me honestly coming to you and trying to show you that I see your pain as well, and I want to bring a compassion to your pain, while I certainly need the same for myself. And you turned it around and made it sound like it was just another way in which I had failed you or something like that. Months later, after we'd gone to a marital weekend emergency marriage summit, I discovered that she had resumed communication with this person. Okay. And I know you had spoken with me in the immediate aftermath of that discovery. And you want to know what the betrayed male's experience is like? When I discovered that, I uncontrollably began shaking. I could hardly breathe. I was hyperventilating. It literally shook me, like I was shaking. I was practically convulsing. And I called my mother. That's how sad this moment got for me. I was the first person I called. That's how destroyed I was. Okay. Thirdly and lastly, I had moved out, which over time lent some clarity to the nature of my relationship with my spouse that I would not have gotten had I not gone through the very painful process of extricating myself from this situation. And in moving out, we started, as you know, Sam, taking steps in a direction that felt like perhaps now there's a possibility of restoration. And my spouse had said something to the effect of, I'm going to put my words on paper about sort of the terms under which we might be able to make this happen again. I waited around. She said she had started whatever this was that she was going to put to paper, and it never came to fruition. In the meantime, I'm going over there now and then, and we're still continuing a physical relationship with each other, which increasingly started to feel damaging and degrading to myself. And I had a moment when I was on a work trip by myself over like a bad salad and a Sprite. And I'm thinking about this, and I sighed out loud. I said, this is never going to get any better.
Yeah.
There is not going to be a change in direction here. And I let go. And I ceased the physical relationship with her from that moment forward. And all I've gotten since then, in large part thanks to the distance that I achieved between she and I by removing myself from that house, has helped me come to a very clarifying understanding of the toxic nature of my relationship with this person. And I know that it was the right decision now in retrospect. And Sam, how hard it was for me to get there.
It was incredibly hard because it went against what it goes against for many men, which is don't quit, never give up, save your family, whatever you can do to keep your family together, do it, even to a fault, sacrifice your own dignity and your own self-respect. because we're trying to keep the family unit together, and we're trying to somehow preserve what we have known to be home for so long. We've given it everything we could to keep home home. So my last question for you, and we'll talk more about this next time, but my last question, I think every betrayed male who's kind of listening says, okay, but how are you doing now? Like, from that salad and Sprite to where we are today, is this all just a bunch of BS because you're just trying to make us feel better? Or do you genuinely have a sense of self-respect and self-love that you feel proud of the decision that you've made? You don't feel proud of it because it's like, no. Yeah. I had to make the regrettable decision to end my marriage to protect and save me.
I had to protect myself. It had to come down to that. Given the option between fight or flight, I chose both. I fought my ass off for the better part of 2 years. And you're right, Sam. The man in me wanted to go to Home Depot, find the right tools to fix this baby, and I'm going to come home with those tools. I'm going to read the manual. I'm going to find my instructional YouTube videos on how to do this perfectly, and I'm going to tinker with those bolts and wrenches and screwdrivers and drills and whatever else and get that lumber and put it together and make the perfect deck on which my marriage will play out in the happiest of conceivable ways. But then I had to choose flight, despite the fact that I had been with this person for 18 years.
Right.
Had 2 small children with this person. That shows you how urgent it was for me at that point to choose flight, because I am with someone who is not committed to restoring trust, to doing the work of cultivating the safety that I, as her betrayed spouse, absolutely, adamantly, and urgently needed. Okay. How am I doing now? Now, are there moments when I think I wince and feel like, God, I wish I could have made that work? Sure, but that's human. More often than not, especially as time goes by and as I continue doing the work needed to in the time that I've had since moving out, I largely feel great. I am standing on my own 2 feet now. There is much less of an element of codependency in my life. Frankly, I'm sorry if this sounds brutal, but this is one of the ways in which I processed my experience in this relationship. There were times when the degree of emotional maturity that I was experiencing in my spouse made me feel like I had 3 children to care for in that house. Again, I'm sorry if that sounds brutal, but I'm just being honest with you and with myself here. That is how I felt more often than not, especially in those last 2 years, when I had to accept, Sam, that I was with someone who was never going to liberate herself from the toxic shame that she became a prisoner to in the aftermath of discovery. She was never going to fully take accountability for what she had done, and instead was going to remain forever much more invested in demonizing me, because that is easier than taking accountability for the destructive behaviors that destroyed our life together. And I want to very quickly, lastly, Sam, make this point. I am a very flawed person. When I say that, I am not saying that I am some perfect person who is immune to not at all. I believe me, in the last 2 years, I know the ways in which I engage in regressive behavior, childish behavior, emotional dysregulation. I mean, I could go down the line. I could talk to you for half an hour about the mistakes I know I made in my marriage. But at the same time, 2 things can be true at once. Also, I was with someone who did not bring the degree of emotional maturity to a situation that desperately demanded exactly that. And for that reason, among others, that was definitely one of the biggest, if not the biggest. I had to remove myself from that situation. And how am I doing now? I can breathe, Sam. I can breathe again.
You know, there's a reason you're such a good writer, because you have such a gift with words and being able to describe the journey. And you're one of the few people that can speak in just a few sentences, but paint such a big picture. And being able to breathe again, we cannot underscore enough how absolutely important it is to be able to breathe, because that breathing is the breathing of self-respect and self-love. And listen, you can stay in a
You're gonna make me cry,
marriage.
man.
You can stay in a marriage affected by infidelity and still have self-love and self-respect. I don't care how many people call me nasty names and how many people want to chirp at me on Instagram. And I did block somebody today because, look, you don't get to be, I won't say, we're digressing here. So I think anybody that listens to you, male or female, sits here and goes, I can feel the pain in his voice because he didn't make a decision overnight. It wasn't just a flighty kind of haphazard,
Right.
you know what, I'm just going to be done, blah. It wasn't a moment of rage. It was a contemplated, calculated decision.
Yeah.
And for that, I think you have so much to give. And that's why I'm just honored that you are coming in to just share part of your journey and answering questions. And so for those of you that are watching and listening, especially the betrayed male, I've said this for 20 years. I'll keep saying it. And I'll say it on behalf of myself and Max today as we see you, we hear you. You can open up 17 links on Google Chrome, and then 90% of them are going to say, when she is betrayed, when she is betrayed, when he cheats. So listen, you betrayed males, man, we love you and we see you and we hear you and we understand. I was meeting with a guy just Monday night, and I had to say to him, listen, I'm sorry for what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to tell you this workbook that your wife needs to get. And I hate to tell you the title, but I can't find a better workbook. And he was like, hey, I listened to your podcast. It's okay. Thank you for the disclaimer. So we love you guys that are out there trying to heal. If we can help, email me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com. You can leave a comment. I'd love for you to subscribe. Max is trying to get out there and answer some of your comments on YouTube. So if you want to hear from him, just leave a comment here. And Max, it only gets better, brother. So our next one's going to be even better. I'm just honored to watch the unfolding of the next chapter of your life with bravery and beauty. So I love you, bro. Thanks for coming in. We'll see you all next time on Sam's Healing Podcast.